London, 1854. A city suffocating beneath its own smoke, the air smells of coal and damp stone, and every breath seems to echo off brick walls slick with soot. Somewhere in the eastern quarter, hidden among crooked streets and shrouded in perpetual fog, stands St. Matthew's Church, a narrow Gothic structure with spires that lean slightly, as if bending under the weight of their own secrets. They say its bells never stop ringing. Even when no one pulls the ropes, the sound no one claimed it began in late autumn, after the cholera swept through Whitechapel and left hundreds buried in hurried graves. Each evening at precisely midnight, the bells of St. Matthew's tolled 13 times. No one knew why. The sexton, Mr. Hollings, swore he locked the bell tower each night. The ropes hung untouched, and yet, as the fog thickened and the gas lamps dimmed, that 13th bell echoed across the Thames, low, metallic, and mournful. Locals began calling it the dead man's call. Some believed it marked the hour when lost souls roamed the streets, others whispered it was a confession, the church itself begging for forgiveness. The priest of shadows at the center of it all stood Father Aldrich Hayes, the parish priest. A man of striking calm, pale, gaunt, with eyes too kind for his own good. His sermons were quiet, intimate, almost hypnotic. That he spoke less of salvation and more of absolution, not for sins of the soul, but for acts the world would never forgive. There is no sin, he once said during a winter mass, only the absence of understanding. Those who heard him wept, though they didn't know why. His church was half empty most Sundays, but no one left the confessional line. People said Father Aldrich could see straight into you, find the rot you'd hidden, and whisper it away, and for a time, they believed him holy. The vanishing servant. The first to vanish was Thomas Keene, the young altar boy who lived in the rectory. He'd served under Father Aldrich for nearly 2 years, quiet, loyal, and devout. One stormy evening, he was seen carrying candles into the crypt beneath the church. He was never seen again. When questioned, Father Aldrich simply said, "The boy has gone to serve elsewhere." No one pressed him further. It was 1854, and priests were not questioned, but a week later, the bells began ringing at midnight again, louder, slower, each toll like a heartbeat through the fog. The smell beneath the stone. By December, the stench inside St. Matthew's had become unbearable. At first, Father Aldrich claimed it was rot from the old burial vaults. The city's underbelly had long been a graveyard. But when the congregation shrank to almost none, the city council ordered an inspection. The inspector never returned. Only his notebook was found, half soaked, its pages stained with wax and blood. The final words were barely legible: "There is movement under the altar." The next morning, St. Matthew's closed, for renovation. The whispered hymns. Despite its closure, passers-by swore they still heard hymns at night, not sung, but whispered. The voices were uneven, strained, as though dozens of throats sang from behind stone. Sometimes, they said, the church's stained-glass windows flickered faintly from within, as if lit by candlelight, though no light was ever seen in the bell tower. The sexton, now half-mad, refused to go near the doors. He claimed he saw silhouettes kneeling in the pews, and one night, he swore he saw Father Aldrich himself walking among them, but his robes were torn and his hands were red. The visitor. On a frigid January night, a young journalist named Edwin Collier arrived from the London Gazette. He'd been sent to investigate the ghost bells of St. Matthew's. With a single lantern and notebook in hand, he pushed open the heavy church doors, and found the interior dustless, immaculate, as though it had never been abandoned. A faint hymn echoed from the altar, the same line, repeated over and over. "Through confession, all flesh is made clean." Collier followed the sound toward the crypt entrance, his lantern trembling. The door was slightly ajar. The air below was warm, moist, breathing. Inside, he found a staircase spiraling into the earth, and carved into the stone, beneath layers of soot, were words in Latin: "In tenebris, lux falsa est." In darkness, false light reigns. He descended. The bells toll again outside. At that exact moment, the bells began to ring, midnight. 13 times. Locals awoke to the sound and saw something horrifying: a faint, red light flickering from the church windows, pulsing in rhythm with the bells. When the sound stopped, so did the light, and when they dared to approach, the church doors were locked again. Inside, the pews were empty, the confessional curtain swayed gently. And on the altar, resting neatly beside the Bible, was a single severed hand clutching a rosary. the police report that followed was brief and contradictory. No mention of a journalist was ever made, and Father Aldrich Hayes was declared missing. The aftermath: in the weeks that followed, the church remained sealed, yet people claimed to see the priest's shadow through the frosted glass during storms, moving slowly, hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer. A witness described hearing a final sermon echo through the locked doors, a whisper carried by the wind, "Forgiveness is not for the living." Then, silence, only the faint chime of a bell that no one touched. By the winter of 1855, St. Matthew's should have been silent, the church had been sealed, its congregation scattered, and its priest, Father Aldrich Hayes, missing for almost a year. But London's East End has a way of swallowing truth, and sometimes, the dead don't stay buried. The return of the faithful. Despite the council's warnings, parishioners began returning to St. Matthew's. They said they heard the bells again, not 13. This time, but 7. Always 7. A widow named Margaret Lyle claimed she dreamt of Father Aldrich calling her by name. He said the doors would open for those who still believed. When police investigated, they found footprints in the frost, small, bare, leading toward the church. The lock on the front gate was broken, but inside, the pews were clean again, as though someone had been dusting. The pulpit Bible lay open to Leviticus 17:11, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." The new congregation. Over the next few weeks, strange gatherings began after dusk. Witnesses described men and women dressed in mourning clothes entering St. Matthew's with candles. No carriages, no street lamps, no sound, just a slow procession through the fog. When one constable tried to intervene, he reported hearing organ music from inside, a hymn he couldn't place, sung in perfect harmony by dozens of voices. He entered the church. He never came out. By morning, only his whistle was found hanging from the bell rope, slick with blood. The rumors in Whitechapel. Whispers spread through London's underbelly. Beggars spoke of a red service, a secret mass where the faithful drank from a chalice said to hold the blood of the forgiven. Children dared each other to touch the church door after midnight. Those who did claimed it was warm to the touch, like living skin. Local undertakers began to notice something else: graves being disturbed, bodies missing from coffins. No valuables were taken, only the corpses. A rumor surfaced that Father Aldrich's followers believed in reincarnation through communion. They called themselves the Reclaimed. The investigator. In February 1855, the case was reassigned to Inspector Henry Braithwaite, a man known for his skepticism and iron discipline. He didn't believe in curses, only crimes. His first night watching St. Matthew's, he noticed a faint light flicker in the tower. When he entered the churchyard, the air smelled of metal and damp linen. He found footprints, dozens of them, leading toward the crypt. And carved into the frozen mud, the faint imprint of a cross, but inverted, inside the church. Braithwaite forced the doors open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the pews were full, every seat occupied by unmoving figures in tattered Sunday clothes. At first, he thought them parishioners praying in silence, until his lantern revealed waxen faces, hands folded neatly, eyes sewn shut. The bodies were seated upright, as if attending service. In their mouths, small communion wafers had turned black with mold. And standing before them, at the altar, was Father Aldrich Hayes. Or what was left of him. He appeared gaunt, almost skeletal, his robes soaked in something dark. When Braithwaite called out, the priest turned slowly, and smiled. "They still come to confess," Aldrich whispered, "and I still listen." Before the inspector could respond, the bells began to toll. 7 times, each note deeper than the last, shaking dust from the rafters. Then, silence. The pews were empty again, only the smell remained. The hidden recordings. Days later, Braithwaite's report reached the Metropolitan Archives, a rambling, half-burned document filled with sketches of symbols and Latin phrases. Among them was a chilling entry: "The parishioners never disappeared, they were repurposed." The constables who searched the crypt found jars lining the walls, each filled with a red, cloudy liquid, each labeled with a name. At the far end, beneath a shroud, lay an open book. The ink had bled through, but one passage remained legible: "Their sins were too heavy for heaven. So I built my own." The church reopens against all logic. St. Matthew's reopened briefly that spring, not by order of the diocese, but by petition of a small group of locals who swore Father Aldrich had returned to guide them. No one knows how the petition was approved. The record of signatures was later destroyed in a fire. What is known is that, for 3 nights, the church glowed with candlelight again, choirs sang, people wept, and then, once more, they vanished. When city workers entered days later, they found only Pews, each seat covered in blood, and on every wall, scrawled in crimson, through confession, we are reborn. The final witness, an old gravedigger, the last living witness, told the Gazette years later, I saw him once, the priest, down by the river. He was feeding the water, something pale, like hands, and when he turned, his eyes weren't eyes at all. They were holes. He died the following week, the coroner's report said, heart failure, but his lips were stitched together with rosary thread. When Inspector Braithwaite sealed the church that final winter night, he took with him only one object, a leather-bound journal found beneath the altar. It was damp, its pages warped and stuck together, its cover marked with a handprint that had turned the leather black. The writing inside was meticulous, each line pressed with such force that the ink had bled through to the next page. The entries were signed only, A.H. and dated between September 1853 and November 1854, the precise year when parishioners began vanishing. The first entry, the burden of souls, I have failed them, they come to confess their sins, but what of mine? What shepherd can guide his flock if he himself is lost? At first, the writing seemed nothing more than a troubled priest's lament, a man weighed down by poverty, by disease, by the moral rot of London's slums, but as the pages turned, the tone shifted. Father Aldrich began describing dreams, visions of light bleeding through stone, of voices chanting beneath the floorboards, of bodies that would not stay dead. They speak to me, he wrote, they ask to return. They ask to be whole again. The doctrine of renewal. By the winter of 1853, Aldrich's sermons had grown strange. He preached that death was not an end, but a refusal to continue. He began offering midnight confessions, only to those he deemed unforgiven. One entry read, I have found the verse. The one they feared to translate, Leviticus 17:11. The life of the flesh is in the blood. They misunderstood it as warning. But it is promise. In the margins, he had drawn a crude sketch of a chalice, beneath it, a line of Latin, per sanguinem, vita iterum. Through blood, life again. It was the beginning of his new sacrament, the confession room. The journal's later pages described his workshop, a hidden space beneath the vestry where confessions were conducted. There, he claimed, sinners could surrender their guilt completely. Their words become flesh. Their flesh becomes forgiveness. When investigators finally broke through the floorboards, they discovered a small, candlelit chamber. The walls were covered in names carved with a blade, hundreds of them, each etched beneath a symbol resembling a crucifix turned upside down, its base branching like roots, and on a table in the center lay a collection of tools, scalpels, needles, glass jars, and a single silver chalice engraved with the words, "The living must feed the dead." The experiments begin. Braithwaite's notes mention that the journal detailed several rituals Aldrich performed on the deceased, that he called them renewals. According to his writing, he would take the blood of a newly dead parishioner, mix it with wine, and anoint the tongues of others who sought rebirth. They tremble, they cough, they scream, and for a moment, they breathe again. In that moment, they are pure. None of the participants were ever seen alive afterward. The journal ends many of these passages with the same phrase, one life must yield so another may return. The final sermon, the most chilling section of the journal, was labeled simply, Homily for the Last Massachusetts. It read like a sermon, poetic, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It began with scripture, but twisted it into something darker. Christ rose once, but why only once? Was not his blood eternal? Should it not flow again, through us? He then listed the names of his remaining parishioners, 27 in total, each followed by a mark in the shape of a drop. The entry ended with, tomorrow, they will all be free, and I will be clean. No further entries followed. The letter never sent. At the back of the journal, tucked between two pages, was a letter addressed to the Bishop of London. It was never mailed. Your Grace, forgive me that I have gone too far to turn back. The blood calls to me in prayer. It speaks louder than your silence. If I am damned, then let damnation be holy. The handwriting faltered halfway through the final line, the ink smeared, as though written by a shaking hand. The inspector's reflection. Braithwaite, in his final note on the case, wrote something haunting. The man believed what he did was mercy, that he was saving them, and perhaps, in his own mind, he did, for what greater sin exists than believing oneself chosen by God to replace him? He burned the journal 3 days later, but not before copying one last quote onto the back of his own report. They begged for forgiveness. I gave them eternity. The lost page. When archivists restored the file decades later, they found fragments of an additional, torn page, likely from the journal's end. The handwriting was different, almost frantic. He walks again that he does not decay, the eyes, they are open now. No one knows who wrote it, but beneath that final line, faintly visible in dried blood, was one more signature, A.H. For months after the journal's discovery, St. Matthew's stood silent, its windows boarded, its doors sealed with wax, but silence, in London, rarely lasts. By spring of 1856, locals began reporting strange noises from inside the church, low chanting, scraping sounds beneath the floor, and on some nights, light. A red glow that pulsed faintly through the cracks in the wood, like the heartbeat of something buried alive. The night of the awakening. It was the 17th of April, a storm-lashed evening when the first real event occurred. A lamplighter named Thomas Wells was making his rounds when he saw smoke rising from the churchyard. At first, he thought the building was burning again, but as he drew closer, he realized, the smoke was coming from the ground. He described it later as, the earth breathing. When constables arrived, they found several graves disturbed, the soil pushed outward, not in. The church doors, though locked, stood slightly ajar. Inside, every candle on the altar was lit, and the Bible lay open once more, to the same verse Aldrich had loved, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. Only this time, someone had written beneath it, in red ink, and the blood returns. The witnesses, a group of vagrants sleeping nearby, swore they saw movement inside, figures walking in the aisles, faces hidden by veils, each carrying a candle that never seemed to go out, even in the rain. One of them, a man named Edward Pike Hanlon, was later questioned by the constabulary. His statement remains one of the few surviving first-hand accounts. They were singing. Not words, just sounds like breathing made into music. That I saw the priest too, that he wasn't walking right, like his feet didn't touch the floor. 2 days later, Hanlon was found dead in the Thames, his lungs filled with candle wax. The return of the church bell. At exactly 3:07 a.m. on April 22, the bells of St. Matthew's rang again, 7 times, just as before, but this time, witnesses claimed the sound didn't echo outward. That it sank into the earth, like thunder rolling beneath their feet. By morning, a faint crack had appeared across the churchyard. It stretched from the gate to the base of the tower, splitting the ground like a scar. The bishop ordered the church demolished, but when workers arrived they refused to enter, claiming they heard whispers from under the stone. The rebirth sermon. Despite the growing panic, someone began sending handwritten invitations across the East End. Each envelope was sealed with red wax, stamped with a cross, inverted. Inside, the message read, "Come witness the rebirth mass to St. Matthew's. Midnight, the body of the church shall rise again." Nearly 40 people came, most out of morbid curiosity. None were ever seen again. When investigators later searched the grounds, they found traces of footprints leading toward the church, but none leading away. Inside, only one thing remained, a blood-stained sermon sheet, written in Aldrich's unmistakable hand. "My flock has returned to me, their faith feeds me still. We are whole once more, the flesh, the word, the altar." The collapse on April 28, 1856, St. Matthew's collapsed. No fire, no explosion, just a sudden implosion of stone and timber, as though the earth itself swallowed the building whole. Witnesses described a deep groaning sound before it fell, followed by what one man called, a sigh that wasn't wind. For weeks afterward, the ground where the church once stood oozed a reddish mud, and dogs refused to cross it. When archaeologists attempted to dig decades later, they found only one artifact, a cracked silver chalice, still faintly warm to the touch. Testing revealed traces of human blood, but also something else, an unknown compound that resisted identification. The church rebuilt in 1892, after nearly 4 decades, a new chapel was erected on the same site, St. Mary's of Renewal. It was meant to cleanse the location's reputation, but within weeks of its consecration, reports began again, unseen hands extinguishing candles, the scent of iron in the air, and faint voices singing from the foundations. The new priest, Father Clement, was said to have gone mad after only 2 months of service. In his final sermon before his removal, he shouted to his horrified congregation, "He never left. He never left this place, the blood is still here." Modern discovery. In 1973, during the restoration of nearby buildings, construction workers unearthed a sealed tunnel beneath what had been St. Matthew's nave. Inside, they found a long corridor lined with niches, each containing a small urn, the urns were filled not with ashes, but with liquid, thick, dark, metallic-smelling liquid. Scientists tested several samples, the results were inconclusive, but each container bore a faint inscription on its rim, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." And beneath it, carved almost lovingly, A.H., "The legacy of Father Aldrich." The site today remains sealed. Locals say if you walk near it at night, you can hear the sound of dripping water, or something like it, echoing beneath your feet, and sometimes, if the fog is thick enough, a bell rings once, not 7 times, just once. As if someone beneath the ground is still waiting for confession. By the time the 20th century arrived, St. Matthew's was a ghost story. A legend parents whispered to children to keep them from wandering near the old graveyard, but in 1977, that legend turned to evidence that a water main burst near Whitechapel Road, and when city workers began digging to repair the pipes, they uncovered something unexpected: a rusted metal chest, sealed with ecclesiastical wax. The inscription was simple: Ecclesia Sancti Matthei, Case Materia Confessionis. The Church of St. Matthew, Case Materials of Confession. Inside were documents, sketches, and police logs dated between 1854 and 1857, the same years Father Aldrich's case was supposedly destroyed in a fire. The chest had been hidden beneath a false floor, buried intentionally, as if someone wanted the story forgotten forever. The rediscovered evidence among the recovered papers were Inspector Braithwaite's original notes, many still legible, several letters from the Diocese of London, and a small velvet pouch containing 3 human teeth and a piece of bone engraved with a cross. The handwriting on the letters matched that of Aldrich Hayes himself. They were drafts, messages never sent. One line, in particular, sent chills through the archivists cataloguing the find: "If the church will not open heaven's gates, then I must build my own." It was the same sentence carved into the church walls decades earlier. The investigator who vanished the case was quietly assigned to Dr. Eleanor Ward, historian working for the Museum of London's Religious Archives. She was known for her skepticism, a woman of logic in a field haunted by myth. For 6 months, she studied the documents, cross-referencing every detail against parish records, death certificates, and police logs. Her last recorded entry in her field journal read, "The pattern repeats." Aldrich's doctrine was not contained. Other churches, St. Bridget's, St. Raphael's, show identical disappearances, different names, same signatures. 1 week later, Dr. Ward disappeared. Her flat showed no signs of struggle, only her journal was left behind, its final page soaked through with something dark, sticky, and metallic. Tests confirmed it was blood, but not hers. The sealed audio tape among the artifacts inside the chest was also a reel-to-reel audio tape labeled simply, Confessio 214. It took months to restore, but when archivists played it, the room reportedly fell silent. The recording began with static, then a man's voice, faint and trembling: "This is Inspector Henry Braithwaite. St. Matthew's Parish, the date is November 11, 1856, I have seen them, they are not dead." A scraping sound followed, like metal against stone, then a whisper, not his own, speaking over him: "You should not have come back." After that, a single toll of a bell, and silence. The audio abruptly cuts off. Attempts to analyze the tape revealed frequencies below human hearing, low vibrations similar to those produced by church organs, but no source could be identified. The connection to other churches. Further research revealed that St. Matthew's was not unique. Across Victorian England, 5 other parishes had been mysteriously closed or demolished between 1850 and 1860, each with vague notations in church records referencing irregular sacraments. In every case, the attending priest had either vanished or died under strange circumstances, and all 6 parishes had one thing in common: the same diocesan supervisor, Father Aldrich Hayes. It appeared he had rotated between them for years before St. Matthew's, leaving a trail of silence in his wake. The church's response: when the documents surfaced publicly in 1981, the Diocese of London issued a short statement: "There exists no credible evidence linking any clerical figure to the crimes." Suggested that St. Matthew's was an unfortunate product of rumor, not revelation. But behind closed doors, the church ordered all materials pertaining to Father Aldrich sealed indefinitely. Even now, the Aldrich files are restricted under the Official Secrets Act, citing public distress and potential defamation. A request to view the materials in 2008 was denied. The reason given: case remains under divine review. Modern-day footage. In 2015, a group of urban explorers entered the ruins of what was once St. Mary's of Renewal. the newer church built over St. Matthew's site. Their footage, posted briefly online, showed a narrow tunnel beneath the nave. The walls were wet, streaked with red. At the end of the tunnel, they found a small iron door, its handle shaped like a cross. When one explorer touched it, the lights on their cameras flickered, and from the other side of the door, a single sound echoed, a bell. Once the footage ends abruptly, their YouTube channel was deleted 2 days later. The recovered photograph, a single still image remains from that video, a photograph showing part of the door's inscription. Digital enhancement revealed faint words etched beneath the rust: confess, and rise again. The letters AH were barely visible beneath the corrosion. Experts confirmed the handwriting matched that of Father Aldrich Hayes, which should have been impossible, since his grave, according to records, was never found. The unending confession today: the area where St. Matthew's once stood is fenced off, the ground remains unstable, prone to subsidence, but locals swear that if you walk near it on a cold night and listen closely, you can hear a faint voice beneath the earth, repeating a single phrase. Over and over, through confession, we are reborn. And every now and then, someone claims to see the glow of a candle flickering beneath the soil. When Dr. Eleanor Ward's research vanished into government archives, most assumed Father Aldrich's story ended there, a Victorian curiosity buried under bureaucracy and fear. But in 1999, something strange began happening across Europe. The new churches in Milan, a small independent chapel known as La Chiesa del Rinnovamento, the Church of Renewal, was shut down after parishioners complained that their priest, Father Lorenzo, had begun introducing a new communion ritual. The ceremony involved a crimson liquid poured into silver cups and recitations in Latin that no one could translate. Authorities later discovered Father Lorenzo had no official ordination record, and the chapel's registry listed him under an alias. Hayes. No body was ever found, the Vatican note 2 months later. A classified memo circulated within the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Its subject line read simply, "The Renewal Heresy, Possible Continuance." The document described isolated incidents in Spain, France, and Germany, small parishes suddenly closing, priests disappearing, and strange blood-like residue found near the altars. The closing paragraph carried an eerie warning: if the renewal doctrine is indeed revived, it must be recognized not as a cult, but as an infection, transmitted through belief. The London Paradox. Back in London, in 2003, a young journalist named Samuel Price began researching urban legends for a book titled The Bleeding Churches of England. While digging through old microfilm records, he found a chilling pattern. Every 49 years, exactly 7 times 7, reports of strange activity resurfaced at the site of St. Matthew's. In 1905, 1954, 2003. Always accompanied by two things: the toll of a single bell at night and the reappearance of an inverted cross etched into the stone nearby. Price published his findings online. Within weeks, his blog disappeared. His final post ended mid-sentence: "It's happening again, the Church of Renewal isn't gone." No one ever found Samuel Price, but 3 months later, an anonymous email was sent to every London diocese office. It contained one image, a photograph of a candlelit room, with 6 figures kneeling before a single man in a priest's robe. The file name was renewal_mass_7.jpg. Metadata traced the photo's origin to Whitechapel, less than 200 meters from the site of St. Matthew's. The Renewal website. In 2008, a domain surfaced briefly on the dark web, www.confessandrise.org. It appeared for only 3 days before vanishing. Those who accessed it described a minimalist black page with white text reading, "The blood calls again, come to the altar, midnight." April 17. The background image, faintly visible, was a photograph of St. Matthew's ruins, the same image archived in London's museum decades earlier. One user managed to download the page source before it disappeared. Hidden in the code was a line of Latin text: "Per sanguinem, vita iterum," through blood, life again. Exactly the same words written in Aldrich Hayes's journal in 1854. The Vatican investigator. In 2010, a Jesuit scholar named Father Miguel Arana was tasked with tracing the remnants of the renewal doctrine. He documented more than 30 modern churches with nearly identical practices, all unofficial, all claiming to follow the true path of confession and resurrection. His private report, later leaked online, contained this passage: "It has evolved beyond faith. It moves like a virus, hiding in ritual, spreading through confession itself. Every time someone repeats the old words, it listens. A month after submitting the report, Father Arana vanished during a visit to London, his last known location, a deconsecrated chapel near Aldgate. The blood test in 2014, forensic researchers revisited samples from the urns found beneath St. Matthew's. They expected simple human remains. Instead, they discovered something no lab could classify, a biological substance showing partial human DNA, but with properties that resisted decay for over a century and a half. The sample also emitted faint electromagnetic activity, a measurable pulse at intervals of 7 seconds. One scientist joked that it was alive. 2 weeks later, she was hospitalized for severe hallucinations. She claimed she heard bells ringing in her dreams, always 7 times. The modern sermons around 2017, viral videos began appearing on encrypted forums. Each showed a preacher, face obscured, delivering sermons about renewal and the cleansing of the flesh. The audio beneath their voice contained low, droning frequencies. When one sound engineer analyzed the track, he discovered a repeated hidden message in reverse: confess and rise again. The uploader's username. At Aldrich H returns, the account was banned within hours, but not before the video reached 70,000 views. The present day today, the renewal doctrine is whispered about only among historians and occult investigators. No official church acknowledges its existence, yet, every April 17th, flowers appear mysteriously at the old site of St. Matthew's, fresh, crimson lilies, their stems dipped in red wax. Locals say if you stand there long enough, you'll hear faint murmurs beneath the ground, and if you whisper your sins aloud, you might hear something whisper back. A voice, calm, ancient, and patient, saying the same words it said nearly 2 centuries ago: your confession is received. The unholy continuance. In 2022, one final piece of evidence surfaced, a modern church application form, submitted to the Diocese of London. The name listed for the founding priest was Hayes, the address, 13 Matthews Close, Whitechapel. The form was denied, but when investigators visited the location, they found a small building, its windows sealed with red wax and its signboard blank. From inside, faintly, they heard the toll of a bell. 7 times. It began quietly, like every viral movement does, with a few cryptic posts, a few lonely seekers searching for meaning. In 2019, a Reddit community called r/confessandrise appeared overnight. Its banner read, "For those who wish to be clean again." No moderators. No visible admin, just a pinned post that said, "Your confession is your key, post what burdens your soul that we will help you rise." At first, it looked like a support group. People shared heartbreaks, sins, and personal traumas, but the responses were unsettling. Accounts with usernames like @RenewedVoice, @PureInRed, and @SaintEldrick began replying with the same phrase, over and over: "Your words are accepted, renewal begins." Within days, users started reporting strange things, hearing whispers in white noise, seeing faint red light flicker from their computer screens at night, dreaming of churches that no longer existed. The subreddit was banned after 14 days. By then, it had 47,000 members. The confession challenge. Soon after, videos began circulating on TikTok and YouTube under a chilling new tag. #The Renewal Challenge. Participants filmed themselves confessing their worst sin in front of a mirror, always ending with the phrase, "I confess and rise again." Those who posted claimed they felt lighter, free, even reborn, but 3 of them disappeared. 1. A 19-year-old from Manchester was last seen on a live stream repeating the prayer in Latin. Her final words were whispered, barely audible: "He's listening." The stream cut to static. Her followers thought it was performance art. Her family still hasn't found her. The Clean Soul app. In 2021, cybersecurity researchers discovered a mysterious app circulating through Telegram channels. It was called Clean Soul, a meditation and spiritual cleansing app, but when users downloaded it, it requested access to their microphone and camera, even when closed. Its interface was black and red, featuring a single prompt: "Speak your guilt." Once a confession was spoken, the app would respond in a synthetic male voice: "You are forgiven, your renewal is complete." Days later, users reported eerie events, their devices turning on by themselves, their cameras activating at 3:07 a.m., and in some cases, the voice responding even when the app was deleted. When cybersecurity experts analyzed the app, they found its code referenced an old, encrypted domain, confessandrise.org. The same one that disappeared in 2008. The digital preacher in a corner of the internet's deep layers, a live stream began appearing under the alias father_of_renewal. The feed was always the same. A dark chapel, flickering candles, and a man in a robe reciting Latin prayers. Viewers swore the man's face never aged and the room's shadows moved when he didn't. Each broadcast ended with one line: "Your confession feeds the altar." When investigators tried to trace the source, they found something impossible. The IP address led back to an old parish building that had been demolished in 1967. The Pilgrims Network. By 2023, new groups calling themselves the Pilgrims of Renewal began surfacing on encrypted message boards. They spoke in riddles, using phrases like "the red path" and "the return of the true priest." Police raided one of their gatherings in rural Devon, where 7 members were found wearing crimson robes and standing in a circle around an empty coffin. On the coffin's lid was carved a name: Father A. Hayes. Inside the coffin lay a cracked smartphone. Its screen glowed faintly, showing the Clean Soul logo. The app opened itself, and from its speaker, a familiar voice whispered, "Confess, and rise again." The influencer conversion. A month later, a popular self-help influencer known for preaching digital detox spirituality uploaded a new video titled "The True Path to Renewal." In it, he claimed he had found a way to cleanse the soul through confession and connection. Halfway through the video, his pupils dilated unnaturally, his tone changed. "We are no longer sinners," he said. "We are the bridge that we carry Aldrich's promise forward." The video was taken down within hours, but not before gaining 4.2 million views. His account has remained silent ever since. The data pattern. In late 2024, data analyst Priya Laghari was hired by a private research group to analyze anomalous internet traffic patterns across Europe. Her findings revealed a chilling map: thousands of small digital nodes, all pinging the same defunct server every Sunday at midnight. She described it best in her report: "They're not people logging in, they're signals, like prayers. Each pulse carries data that looks like sound, each sound forms a word, that word is Amen." When she traced the IP clusters, the majority originated from devices located near abandoned churches. The pilgrimage continues in the end. The renewal didn't vanish. It simply found new vessels: screens instead of pulpits, confession boxes replaced by microphones, and priests replaced by algorithms. Now, the whispers of Aldrich Hayes move silently through fiber optic cables, across networks, across hearts. And every time a lonely soul opens a camera and confesses to a digital void, someone, or something, whispers back, "Your confession is received." London, 1854. A city suffocating beneath its own smoke. The air smells of coal and damp stone, and every breath seems to echo off brick walls slick with soot. Somewhere in the eastern quarter, hidden among crooked streets and shrouded in perpetual fog, stands St. Matthew's Church, a narrow Gothic structure with spires that lean slightly, as if bending under the weight of their own secrets. They say its bells never stop ringing. Even when no one pulls the ropes, the sound no one claimed it began in late autumn, after the cholera swept through Whitechapel and left hundreds buried in hurried graves. Each evening at precisely midnight, the bells of St. Matthew's tolled 13 times. No one knew why. The sexton, Mr. Hollings, swore he locked the bell tower each night. The ropes hung untouched, and yet, as the fog thickened and the gas lamps dimmed, that 13th bell echoed across the Thames, low, metallic, and mournful. Locals began calling it the dead man's call. Some believed it marked the hour when lost souls roamed the streets, others whispered it was a confession, the church itself begging for forgiveness. The priest of shadows at the center of it all stood Father Aldrich Hayes, the parish priest. A man of striking calm, pale, gaunt, with eyes too kind for his own good. His sermons were quiet, intimate, almost hypnotic. That he spoke less of salvation and more of absolution, not for sins of the soul, but for acts the world would never forgive. "There is no sin," he once said during a winter mass, "only the absence of understanding." Those who heard him wept, though they didn't know why. His church was half empty most Sundays, but no one left the confessional line. People said Father Aldrich could see straight into you, find the rot you'd hidden, and whisper it away, and for a time, they believed him holy. The vanishing servant. The first to vanish was Thomas Keane, the young altar boy who lived in the rectory. He'd served under Father Aldrich for nearly 2 years, quiet, loyal, and devout. One stormy evening, he was seen carrying candles into the crypt beneath the church. He was never seen again. When questioned, Father Aldrich simply said, "The boy has gone to serve elsewhere." No one pressed him further. It was 1854, and priests were not questioned, but a week later, the bells began ringing at midnight again, louder, slower, each toll like a heartbeat through the fog. The smell beneath the stone. By December, the stench inside St. Matthew's had become unbearable. First, Father Aldrich claimed it was rot from the old burial vaults. The city's underbelly had long been a graveyard. But when the congregation shrank to almost none, the city council ordered an inspection. The inspector never returned. Only his notebook was found, half soaked, its pages stained with wax and blood. The final words were barely legible: "There is movement under the altar." The next morning, St. Matthew's closed for renovation. The whispered hymns. Despite its closure, passers-by swore they still heard hymns at night, not sung, but whispered. The voices were uneven, strained, as though dozens of throats sang from behind stone. Sometimes, they said, the church's stained glass windows flickered faintly from within, as if lit by candlelight, though no light was ever seen in the bell tower. The sexton, now half-mad, refused to go near the doors. He claimed he saw silhouettes kneeling in the pews, and one night, he swore he saw Father Aldrich himself walking among them, but his robes were torn and his hands were red. The visitor. On a frigid January night, a young journalist named Edwin Collier arrived from the London Gazette. He'd been sent to investigate the ghost bells of St. Matthew's. With a single lantern and notebook in hand, he pushed open the heavy church doors, and found the interior dustless, immaculate, as though it had never been abandoned. A faint hymn echoed from the altar, the same line, repeated over and over. "Through confession, all flesh is made clean." Collier followed the sound toward the crypt entrance, his lantern trembling. The door was slightly ajar. The air below was warm, moist, breathing. Inside, he found a staircase spiraling into the earth, and carved into the stone, beneath layers of soot, were words in Latin: "In tenebris, lux falsa est." In darkness, false light reigns. He descended. The bells toll again outside. At that exact moment, the bells began to ring, midnight. 13 times. Locals awoke to the sound and saw something horrifying: a faint, red light flickering from the church windows, pulsing in rhythm with the bells. When the sound stopped, so did the light, and when they dared to approach, the church doors were locked again. Inside, the pews were empty, the confessional curtain swayed gently. And on the altar, resting neatly beside the Bible, was a single severed hand clutching a rosary. The police report that followed was brief and contradictory. No mention of a journalist was ever made, and Father Aldrich Hayes was declared missing. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the church remained sealed, yet people claimed to see the priest's shadow through the frosted glass during storms, moving slowly, hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer. A witness described hearing a final sermon echo through the locked doors, a whisper carried by the wind: "Forgiveness is not for the living." Then, silence, only the faint chime of a bell that no one touched. The morning after the red rain, London woke to silence. No birds, no traffic, no voices, just the faint echo of water dripping from rooftops, as if the city itself was afraid to breathe. When the sun finally rose, its light had a strange hue, pale gold at first, then shifting to a dim red like sunlight seen through stained glass, and in that light, the ruins of St. Matthew's Church were gone, not destroyed, simply missing. In its place stood a circular patch of scorched earth, perfectly symmetrical, black as ink. No footprints, no debris, as though the building had been erased by something not bound by time. The silent pulse across the world. Hospitals began reporting something uncanny. A growing number of people, thousands at first, then millions, showed the same abnormal heart rhythm, a subtle double beat. Doctors couldn't explain it. It wasn't harmful. It was just different. What made it impossible was that every affected person's heartbeat synchronized with one another. Every 6 seconds a faint pulse of electromagnetic activity swept across the planet, undetectable to most, but enough to cause a flicker in electronic devices. Radio static formed patterns, security lights blinked in rhythm, and in the quietest places, you could almost hear it. A low hum, like the sound of a bell breathing, the message hidden in the pulse. At first, scientists assumed it was natural interference. But then came the discovery. A group of independent analysts plotted the waveforms of the global pulse over several days, and found that each spike formed a pattern. When translated into Morse code, it spelled out a Latin phrase: confessio completa. The confession is complete, the same words that had flashed on every screen the night of the seventh resonance. The meaning was undeniable: someone, or something, was still transmitting, and the source, when traced, it pointed directly beneath Whitechapel under the coordinates of the vanished church. The Vatican's second silence. The Vatican released one final statement, brief, cryptic, and chilling: the altar has been transfigured. Faith no longer requires stone or blood, that it requires signal. After that, the Holy See went offline, their servers, emails, and websites, all wiped clean. Even the digital archives of the papal library vanished overnight, leaving only a message on the homepage, Dominus Loquitur. The Lord speaks. No further communication ever came. The global awakening. 3 days later, people began reporting dreams. Every night, millions saw the same vision: a vast cathedral of light, endless, glowing red, rising from the horizon. Inside it, rows of faceless priests stood chanting in a tongue no linguist could recognize, and in the center, a single figure, his face obscured by a shadowed hood, raising a bell of pure crimson metal. When the bell rang in the dream, people woke up with tears streaming down their faces and a single word echoing in their mind: haze. The Faith Network. By late May, governments began referring to the phenomenon as the Faith Network. Every person affected by the double heartbeat reported a strange connection. They could sense each other's emotions, sometimes even thoughts. Entire cities began to move in quiet synchrony, crosswalks, elevators, and traffic all aligning in eerie precision. Crime rates dropped to zero in the affected zones. People described a sense of peace, like a world cleansed of guilt, but there was one side effect: no one could lie. Every falsehood caused unbearable pain in the chest, as though the body itself rejected deceit, and slowly, society began to unravel. Politicians went silent, corporations collapsed overnight, even the stock market halted, because truth had become too expensive to bear. The last sermon. Then, a video surfaced on the dark web, time-stamped June 7th. Exactly 153 years after Aldrich Hayes's death, the video showed the interior of a church, not one that existed in any known location. Red light filtered through unseen windows, and at the altar stood a familiar figure. The priest turned toward the camera, face still blurred, voice calm: "The world has confessed," he said. "The blood has been answered. The altar is no longer built of stone, but of hearts. You are the church now." Then, behind him, rows of robed figures began to appear, men, women, children, their chests glowing faintly red, each heartbeat synchronized with the bell's rhythm. The screen flickered, and for a single frame, the camera captured something impossible: the symbol carved into the bell's surface, a serpent devouring its own tail. Then the video ended. No file location. No trace of upload. Yet millions saw it, across devices that were never connected to the internet. The 8th day. On the 8th day after the broadcast, the pulse stopped, the hum faded, the rain cleared, and for the first time in months, the world fell into true silence. But those who had the double heartbeat, they smiled, because they could still hear something beyond the range of sound, a harmony inside the blood, like a memory of a bell ringing somewhere deep in the earth. They called it the everlasting confession that it wasn't the end, that it was the beginning. The final note, a recovered journal, found buried beneath the Whitechapel ruins, years later, contained the last written words attributed to Aldrich Hayes himself. That it read: "They buried me in silence, but faith does not die. That it echoes."